Welcome to the latest episode of the Intelligent Wealth podcast. I'm very pleased to announce that we've got a very special guest today, Graham Rowan, who is an international speaker, TV presenter, and author who's worked with high net worth investors and family offices for more than a decade. I know he's good because I've been to one of his events, the Beaufort Private Equity, which is his global network of over 600 high net worth investors and family offices in 37 countries. Graham has interviewed some quite amazing people, I think, including the legendary Jim Rogers and Brian Tracy, who I both know very well. So I've been very much looking forward to this interview. So, Graham, over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Indeed. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Tony. It's great to be here. And yeah, we met back in the summer at an event in London, and then I think you came along to my event.
Uh-huh.
And I think we kind of have the same kind of values, I think, from what you've been saying. So it'll be
Absolutely.
great to have a conversation and go into things in a bit more depth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, yes, I came to your event in London and it was a fabulous event. Quite a number of private equity companies were presenting, but that's not the only thing you do. What I do find interesting is that you've decided to live in Portugal. I don't blame you. I quite like that kind of idea. But before we get on to that, I just wanted to ask you briefly a little bit about your personal background, like where you grew up, what kind of class you were in, working class, middle class, upper class, whatever, and what was your education like? What kind of beginning did you have in life before you got into all this?
Well, it's fascinating. I was talking recently about a similar theme, and I think one of the things as I look back that amazes me about that time was the social mobility, because my parents both came from a very working class background. My father in
Uh-huh.
Jarrow and my mother in the outskirts of Newcastle on Tyne. I was actually born in a council flat in Aberdeen. My father was on a contract up there at the time, and then we moved back to northeast England where I grew up. But in 5 years, we went from that council flat in Aberdeen to a sort of mock Tudor 1930s four-bed semi in one of the posh parts of Whitley Bay with two cars on the drive. And my mother had her own career, which was quite rare back then. She was a draftswoman. My father was a technical director of an engineering company, actually designed whiskey distilleries. So he used
Hmm.
to come back with some samples from there. Um, so yeah, I think I probably had what you'd call a middle class upbringing. But just a few years before that, you would very definitely have said it was working class. Now, I don't think that kind of social mobility happens today. I think it's one of the challenges that we have, and I think we're now seeing, perhaps for the first time, a generation that's going to be less well off than their parents. So we were
Mm.
part of those kind of boom years after World War II when everything was growing and rebuilding. Although I was born just 2 years after rationing finished. So
Mm.
I think one of the things that often surprises me is that the whole events of the Second World War are viewed now as ancient history.
Mm.
And yet, for those of us born just a decade or so after it, it still kind of features quite strongly in our worldview. And one of the
Mm.
reasons I'm so active and anxious about the way we're losing our freedoms at the moment, things like freedom of speech, freedom of movement, all the things that were really destroyed during the pandemic, is that my father was on anti-aircraft guns in World War II, and I don't think he did that to try and live in a society where Keir Starmer sends people to jail for forwarding a tweet. So I think one of the things I often say to our members is, obviously, we're all about creating and protecting wealth, but what good is all the money in the world if we lose our most basic freedoms? So I'm afraid that is my hobby horse that I will come back to many times. But I think, having grown up in those post-war years and having known just one generation away from fighting in a world war, those things really matter, and I can't believe the lightness and the ease with which we seem prepared to give them up.
It is remarkable. I don't want to spend too much time on that because, like you, I tend to feel very strongly about it for the same reasons. The irony is that we fought dictatorships like the Nazis to have freedoms. And now we're just in peacetime giving up all our freedoms. It all starts from freedom of speech. But anyway,
Yeah, I've got my Free Speech Union badge on here, Tony. So
I usually wear it as well. I'm glad you remember Free Speech Union. So am I. We've got a lot of similarities here. Now, Graham, what I did want to find out is what kind of education did you go through? Did you go through A levels and degree, or did you leave school early?
A bit of both. I went to a grammar school. Remember those?
Me too.
And I got 9 O levels and 3 A levels. And I was supposed to go into the family law firm. My uncle is a very successful solicitor. And, he used to be driving Cadillacs around Whitley Bay in the 1960s, which was pretty rare. And he would smoke these Samarit cigarettes with a gold band around them, and I naively thought this looked like a great lifestyle. So I went to university to read law, and it bored the pants off me. I couldn't believe how tedious this jurisprudence and Rex versus Smith 1929 stuff was. So I jacked it in after a year, much to the chagrin of my family. And I ended up hopping around various jobs for a few years. It was a time of the sort of Thatcher recession in the late 70s, early 80s. So I ended up going to London, and I worked as a driving instructor in Camden Town for the British School of Motoring, with getting paid £1.90 an hour while all these people tried to kill me. And then I applied for a job at in the IT department of the Daily Telegraph in Fleet Street, and to my amazement passed their aptitude test. So that began a 25-year corporate career in IT. I ended up going into management consultancy, and then I ended up at a company called James Martin Associates. We were acquired by Texas Instruments and became their sort of software division. So in the 1990s, I was running a division selling multi-million-dollar billing systems to telecoms companies all around the world. Wow. So I was then making a lot more money than I would have done as a provincial solicitor. So I kind of had the last laugh on my family, but I suppose it never quite had the status of being a lawyer, So I'm not sure I ever kind of really regained that credibility in their eyes.
Yeah, it's a lot of similarities with mine, although I don't think I would argue I was as successful as you have been, but it's still very interesting parallels. What I find interesting is that you've managed to speak at some quite high profile places like the United Nations in New York, the Harvard Business School in Boston, and both houses of the Parliament in the UK. Quite incredible, I think. And I'm so jealous that you've interviewed Jim Rogers and the great business guru Brian Tracy as well.
Well, the Jim Rogers one was funny. I was kind of his warm-up act at the World Wealth Creation Conference in Singapore. And we'd already agreed, I had a film crew there for the TV, Sky TV and everything. We'd already agreed we were going to do the interview after he came off stage. But of course, being the person he is and being in his hometown of Singapore, he was mobbed after his talk. And I literally had to kind of pummel my way through the crowds and drag him off stage to the studio. So we eventually got a few minutes with him, but it was, we did a documentary about the whole thing. It was almost like, will he, won't he? We've been agreeing these things, and eventually dragged him away and managed to get an interview with him. But I mean, yeah, an amazing guy who, is one of the kind of leviathans of the investment world, really.
Yeah, was it called Renaissance, his company?
Well, he started out with George Soros, and he was one of the original traders with him, and then he went very big into the commodities world, and he started his own commodities index. He's famous for having driven around the world on a motorbike and then in a Mercedes, looking at all these different countries where he could invest. So he really got out there and did his own due diligence on the ground, which I think I have huge respect for.
Didn't he make incredible returns? I read about Jim Rogers that for many years he was making 66% a year, and that the legend is that he didn't know much about investments, but he just recruited highly intelligent people and gave them shares in his business and just let them get on with it, which I find amazing.
I think it was a mixture of the two. I mean, I think he learned a lot at the feet of George Soros.
Right. Okay.
He made a lot of money himself, and then I think as he wanted to start slowing down a bit maybe and focusing on his life in Singapore, then he brought more people in to to run things for him, but he's always, I think, had a close hand on the tiller, and kept things.
Yeah.
And he's got such perspectives on the world. He talks about just waiting until there's money on the table and going to pick it up as if it was the easiest thing in the world. But most of us, let's be honest, we overtrade, we get impatient,
Yes.
and I always come back to this quote from the other great legend, Charlie Munger, that we sadly lost last year at the age of 99. And he said, "The big money is not made in the buying and the selling; it's made in the waiting." And that's
Yes.
where,
So true.
certainly in our experience with private equity, you've got to be prepared to wait 3, 5, 7 years, and then you get the big payday. If you're impatient and you're trying to do mouse clicky day trading, you're not going to make the big money. So we need to learn from these guys that patience is one of the most important parts of being an investor.
I couldn't agree more. I think you're spot on there. There's surveys that have shown that the length of ownership of shares on global markets now has reduced massively in recent years. People in the past, when you had paper-based share certificates rather than electronic trading, they would literally just forget about their shares, put them in a coffee can, and it could sit there for years. And of course, the greatest returns with stockbroker accounts are from dead people.
Yes, who can't trade anymore. Exactly, that's right. And of course, that plus reinvesting dividends and so on. That's where long
Yeah.
term the big money gets made in the public markets. But even in the private markets, where for me, the real value is being created,
Yes.
you do have to A, back the right horse, and then B,
Yes.
wait while they implement their plan, and that can take a
Yeah.
few years. And sometimes external forces can slow things down, but if you stay faithful to them, often they will come good in the end. And that
Yes.
remaining on board is the hard part. And so few people are good at it. And of course, attention spans generally are diminishing. I keep
Yes.
I do quite a few YouTube videos, and the producers keep saying, "Well, oh yeah, it's great, Graham, but can we just make it a bit shorter?" I said, "Well, what shall I just say hello and goodbye? Would that work for you?" You've got to overcome these reduced attention spans and learn some patience if you want to do well in today's investing world.
You've almost got to be anti-human to succeed at investing, don't you think? Because it's got to be one where you're not over emotional and reactive. You've got to have that patience and not get carried away when you do well or bad. I mean, Buffett is a great example of that, and I think that's very difficult for people to do because it isn't instinctive for human beings. I once read a survey that showed that people were the loss of stock market investment when they've invested the money was akin to death, and surely it's not as bad as that.
No, that's right. That's the other part that, again, I would come back to people like Munger saying that if you're not prepared to take at least a couple of 50% drawdowns during your investing career, you shouldn't be in the stock market. And I think what we're seeing now, which I'm actually slightly concerned about, is a massive move towards passive investing in tracker funds.
Yes.
And I think that we're getting to the point where it's actually going to distort the market, and there's going to be nobody on the other side of these trades. So I actually think that concentration is better than diversification if you are a sophisticated investor. If you're John and Mary Normal in Acacia Avenue, East Cheam, then maybe that's better than doing nothing. Because, I worry, for example, that the pension funds have cut back on their equity investments down to, I think, about 4 or 5% now, where it used to be 50%. So there's very little exposure to equities in pension funds. A lot of people, if they do anything at all in their ISAs now, they're just doing these tracker funds, which are low cost. But, you're going to just get the average of the average of the average with things like that. If you want to get some exceptional returns, you've got to be prepared to focus a bit.
Yes. Yeah, the trouble is that they can keep showing these statistics that show that the majority of active funds underperform passive funds. And that's the problem, isn't it? And so people think that's the answer. But I also read a survey recently that showed that private equity gives you better returns than quoted stocks. And so you just got, like you say, you got to pick the right ones though, and you've got to be very, very patient with private equity.
Yeah, and
because
what we tend to focus on is what I call direct private equity, rather than just going into the big private equity funds where you have no control over what they're investing in, and often you get quite chunky fees in those funds. If you actually choose a small number of companies and go on that journey with them, you can get life-changing results from just 2 or 3 exits in a 5-year period. So for me, it's all about concentration and focus rather than just saying, I want to be in everything. So, yeah, you could hedge your bets, I guess, put some of your assets into a wide-ranging MSCI World Index or something. But if you really want to get outstanding results, you've got to be prepared to do things that other people are not doing.
Yeah, that's true. And also that we think that the best place to invest is public markets. But in fact, in the last 90 years, only 4% of global companies have contributed to increases in growth, in wealth out of all public equities. And you think, well, hold on a minute, that doesn't sound much different to VC and private equity.
Absolutely. That's one of the least understood statistics in the marketplace. And also, the other thing that's been happening is the number of companies on the public markets has been declining massively
Yes.
in all
Yes.
the major stock markets in Britain and America. So your choice is far more restricted because it's so burdensome to be a public company these days. The regulation, the reporting,
True.
the
Yep.
compliance costs. So a lot of companies are saying, we don't want this anymore. We'll either go to another country, another public market, or we'll get taken private where we don't have those restrictions. And we, for example, can make longer term decisions rather than worrying about what Wall Street thinks every 13 weeks.
Yeah, I totally agreed. Graham, what I found interesting about you as well, you're doing something that I'd love to do, but I'm not quite in the position to do it yet. You've emigrated to a more, dare I say it, tax-friendly country, but also one where it's the sun shines more. Portugal. Tell
Absolutely,
us
yes.
about that.
I am, I suppose, what you'd call a tax exile. But I think this is important, and people don't really think about this enough. You should go where you're well treated. If for me, my journey of this
Agreed.
started with a guy called Andrew Henderson, an American, who wrote a book called Nomad Capitalist, and his
Yes, I've got it here on
motto
my
is,
bookshelf.
"Yeah, go where you're treated best." And in fact, the first place we went was Eastern Europe, to Montenegro. That was when we thought that
Yes.
Jeremy Corbyn was going to get elected into a Marxist government, and we wanted to get out. And we learned that if you just buy a property in Montenegro, you can get residency there. And tax at
Mm,
the time, I think, was about 9% income and capital gains. So we
mm.
did that in 2018. And then Boris surprised us by winning a majority in 2019. And we found that, to be honest, Montenegro was a lovely country, but it was a developing country, not a developed country. So it didn't
Mm.
really have everything we'd want for a full-time home. So we
Yeah.
kept looking, and then we found there's a thing called a D7 passive income visa for Portugal, where if you can show that you can support yourself, you get long-term residency. And there's a thing called a non-habitual residence tax scheme, which at the time was very favorable for us. Now, one of the things you have to understand is these schemes change all the time. And
Yes.
the things that made Portugal attractive to us 3.5 years ago are no longer in place. So
Right.
you've got to look for what's going on, and you've got to combine lifestyle, security, and tax benefits. And for us, we didn't want to grow old in the cold. We love the environment here. It's also a very secure country, one of the top 5 or 6 in the world. And it had favorable tax regimes. So yeah, we came
Yeah.
here 3.5 years ago. We're very happy here. It's a real drag to ever have to leave it to travel for business and events, to be honest. So one of the things I always urge our members to do is, look, at the very least, do your research, have a
Yes.
plan B, because
Yes.
we all have a threshold, I think, at which things just become too painful. And I would have
Mm.
thought the way things are going in Britain over the next 5 years, we're recording this before the October budget. It'll be fascinating to see how things look after that. But we're
Mm.
hearing all this talk about growth and business-friendly government. Really? Tell me that on the 31st of October. I think it's going to be a very hostile environment for wealthy people, a hostile environment for business owners. It has been a hostile environment for private landlords for at least 10 years now.
Mm.
So, have a look around. Come on in. The water's lovely. There are better places you can go.
Yeah, Graham, because we are becoming more mobile now, aren't we? I know a few so-called digital nomads. They tend to be a lot younger than me. They're around my son's age. People who work in countries like Portugal, and because they've got the type of business where they're in front of a screen, all they need is a laptop and internet connection. They can work anywhere in the world. And the argument that Dominic Frisby came out in his book Daylight Robbery was that in the future, countries will compete with one another on the basis of things you've just mentioned: friendliness, climate, tax. And so if you can compete and live in a country that's got less tax, more friendly towards entrepreneurs and wealthy people, and warmer, for example, why wouldn't you move somewhere like that?
Well, to be honest, what I think is happening is going to be kind of a dichotomy, because I think what you're seeing is the bigger Western countries are going more and more Marxist, collectivist, high
Yes.
tax, huge
Yes.
state spending, huge state control. And then there are smaller countries who are going to compete for people
Yes.
like us. And that could be, yes, Portugal, it could be Monaco, it could be Dubai, it could be Singapore. So we for example have a partnership with Henley and Partners, so the world's leaders in all this residency and citizenship stuff.
Yes.
And they said they've been approached by more territories in the last few years than ever before who want to become attractive to wealthier people. So I think what you're going to see is the main countries, what Andrew Henderson calls the legacy brands, like Britain, America, France, Germany, will become less and less attractive places to live for those who've achieved some success in life, got some assets, got some wealth. And there'll be more and more countries that are trying to make themselves attractive and roll out the red carpet for you to go and live there and take your money there. So I think the choice will increase, but it will tend to be perhaps smaller countries, smaller territories. They're sometimes what I would call benevolent dictatorships. You have to accept that. But then I would say, to be fair, where we're living in the West now are no longer true democracies anyway. So, the choice is actually there if you do your research. But you have to be ready to make a move and cut some emotional ties if necessary.
Yeah, but the research I've done on libertarianism, it does show that historically countries that have practiced libertarianism or near libertarianism, in other words, no government and no taxation. I know that's probably a utopian, but certainly countries that have had small government and low taxation have generally prospered enormously. Whereas countries that have got too much government, too big government, too high taxes generally don't perform very well. And of course, we had this in the UK in the 1970s. And until Thatcher came along and completely changed things around. Now, and admittedly, she was a Marmite type character. You either loved or hated her. But Britain was really in a mess then, and she completely turned it around and reduced taxes enormously. And the irony of all this is that by taxing you more heavily, you don't actually raise more tax revenue. Research shows that people find ways to pay less tax. So it actually has the opposite effect. And what it will do is just drive people out of the UK, like you. More and more people will move abroad. And so less entrepreneurs will create businesses, and it will mean less jobs and less tax revenue. So it'll just have the opposite effect, and it'll just impoverish Western countries.
Yeah, and I think the sad fact is that we're going to have to go through a cycle of that pain. In many ways, I think we are very similar to going back to the 1970s.
Yes.
But I think clearly one of the biggest problems is that, the Tories were so bad that people thought, well, Labour can't be any worse. And they're going to find out, obviously, sadly, that that's not true. But I mean, what we haven't had since Thatcher's days is a genuinely conservative government that is low tax, small government, pro-business, pro-growth. And until we get back to that, whether that's a reinvent the Tory party, whether it's reform or some merger of the two, Britain will be in decline. Now, what's interesting is it's not just Britain. I don't know if you've seen Mario Draghi's latest report to the European Union. I mean, it's 400 pages long, so it's a good old doorstop, but it's a real wake-up call. He's saying we are doomed to economic long-term decline unless we turn things around and become much more pro-business, pro-growth, pro-investment. And he's the ultimate kind of EU technocrat, and he's telling them that, but I fear it's falling on deaf ears. So for me, it's not just a British problem, it's an American problem, it's a Western European problem, and we as, if you like, savvy investors have got to become critical thinkers and apply some thinking to our own lives, for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren. The West, as we have known it in the post-war era, is gone. And this is a new world, and you're going to have to make some tough decisions, I think, in the next 3 or 4 years if you want to come out on the right side of history.
Yeah. So the thing, you're pushing against an open door with the type of people that are members of your Beaufort private equity global network, because you're dealing with high net worth individuals, family offices in many countries. So they will be aligned with your thinking, your ethos. Um, you looking at your bio, you've fronted some quite uh, good series on Sky TV, Make Your Money Work, Finding Financial Freedom, and Money and Me. And you've published 4 books. I mean, it's all very impressive stuff. What led you to that? What do you get out of that?
I think we all have a kind of mission or calling. And for me, my calling has always been financial education because,
Yes.
my story, which I didn't tell you, but perhaps I should now, how it all began for me is I told you I was running that division of Texas Instruments. I was making really good money back in the 1990s, and I appointed a professional wealth manager. They put all my money into the Nasdaq, which at the time was booming. I was waking up $2,000 or $3,000 richer every morning. And then we got to the year 2000. I went for my annual portfolio review and it had gone down like 10% or something. So I said, well, this doesn't look quite so good, guys. Shall we take something off the table or do something else? And they said, oh, don't be silly. Don't be such a wimp. Can't you recognize a minor correction in a raging bull market when you see one? I said, okay, you're the experts. And I went off on my travels again. Came back in June 2001. And of course, we'd had the total dot-com crash. They'd lost me £180,000.
Oh
And they
dear.
took me into a little room and said, unfortunately, Mr. Rowan, these losses take your net worth below the level at which we look after clients. So we're going to have to let you go. So I had to go back to my wife, Daphne, and say, not only have we lost a huge chunk of our life savings, we've been fired by our wealth manager. This was in
God,
2001. So that was the start
crazy.
of my journey. That's when I thought I've got to take personal control of my financial future. And I've been preaching that ever since.
Mm,
And that manifests itself into, videos, podcasts, books, TV, anything where I can try and get to people and say, look, don't trust the financial
y-
services industry. You've got to take
yeah.
control because nobody else has got your well-being at the top of their
Yes.
agenda. So everything I've done really has been along those lines. And then that's led into, investments and all the rest of it. But the point is that the key point is that decision to take personal control. Once you get to
Yes.
that, the rest will follow through.
What I find interesting, Graham, is that people who aren't wealthy are probably they may be jealous, they may be envious, but what they don't realize is that most people who become wealthy have had to go through a tremendously difficult journey to get there. And it's not a straight line up, is it? It's like that. I've been in business for 40 years. I've worked so many hours and had so many ups and downs. I'm sure you have as well. It's not been straightforward to achieve wealth. And people might wonder, why are you advising wealthy people how to save tax? Well, we know how hard they've had to work to get there, made lots of sacrifices. Nothing was given to them on a plate. And to then have it all taken away from you by a high taxing government, of course, it's not very nice, is it? So I'm like you. I like to help people become wealthier, which leads me nicely on to this 8-figure journey club that you're going to launch in January, which I can flag myself up. I'd like to join it too. Um, because what you're going to be doing is providing coaching and mentoring to property investors and business owners in how to use direct private equity investing to make the leap from a 7-figure to an 8-figure net worth. Now, I was talking to a young colleague this morning and saying, I really fancy doing that. I want to go from 7 to 8. And of course, the poor lady would like to get to 7 first. I said, well, you'll get there. Just follow this. So tell us a bit about that, your 8-figure
Yeah,
journey.
sure. No, I mean, it's clearly not going to be for everybody because the starting point is that you've already got somewhere.
Yeah.
To be honest, it's just a reflection of my own life and my own journey. What I found was the conventional investments like buy-to-let property,
Mm,
ISAs, pensions, stock
mm,
market, and running my own businesses as I have now. My career divides in two, roughly 25 years in the corporate world. I'm now 20 years running my own businesses.
yeah.
I found I kind of got stuck. I got into the
Yeah.
early 7 figures level, 2 million, 2.5.
Yeah.
And I kind of got stuck there. I thought, well, nothing I'm doing is actually going to make a material difference. There's more and more things getting in the way of my property portfolio, taxes, regulations. There's only so much leverage and
Yeah.
borrowing you can do there.
Yes.
you're getting maybe 6 or 7% in the public stock markets on average, across the
Yep.
years.
Yep.
So how can I break through that and actually get to the next level? And,
Yeah.
that starting point for me is also, by the way, that coming back to our earlier conversations about freedom, I believe these days the minimum kind of level you need to get to have all the choices and options you need to survive in this insecure world, you need to get to an 8-figure
Yeah.
net worth. I think there are still people around who think £1 million is a king's ransom. You try buying an annuity with it, you wouldn't even get the average wage. So for me, you need circa 10 million as a
Yeah.
real base for multi-generational wealth. So that was the starting point. And then I
Yes.
thought, well, how can I get there? And if I look at my own journey, it's actually been backing the right companies in private equity, direct private equity, the companies that can go up 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 times in
Yeah.
a 3, 5, 7, 10-year period. That's kind of been the catalyst and the accelerator for me to get to that next level. So what I'm going to do with this journey is try and look for people who are where I was about 5 years ago. And I mean, a lot of the Beaufort members are like this. They've got a property portfolio. They've perhaps got their own business. They've done a bit in pensions or SAS pensions or ISAs. They're above average in terms of every aspect of
Yes.
their situation. They're probably in the top 3 or 4% of the country. And what I want to do is get them into the top, 0.3 or 0.4%.
Yeah.
And that's a journey that's going to take, really some learning. I've made lots of mistakes, and I've had all
Yeah.
sorts of investments that have not worked out. And I want to sort of help people to get to the things that I've got to quicker without the mistakes I've made. So it'll be
Yeah.
a combination of specific training and what do you do, how do you get into private equity, how do you do due diligence, case studies. And we'll probably at some point form a little mastermind group where we'll actually, go into stuff together, things like that. So I'm quite excited about it. I'm really doing a lot of work into preparing all the material for it. I'll be looking for sort of expressions of interest in it before Christmas, and then we'll be launching it in January. So yeah, that's very much my focus for
Yeah.
next year.
What's interesting is when you think about it, the greatest wealth in the world is usually from people creating their own successful businesses. And these people are the type of people you're attracting to this 8-figure journey club. But you're also the next best thing to creating your own very successful business is to invest in other private successful businesses. And it's not for everyone. It's not for the average person in the street, but for certainly these type of people, it makes a lot of sense. So it does sound very exciting. Yeah, so I wish you the best of luck with that one, really.
Yeah, thank you. I
Um,
think there's a gap in the market. If you look there are
Definitely.
loads of property training courses, a sort of get
Yep.
rich in real estate type things, and
Yep.
there's some on traditional investing, not that many, but there's almost nothing out there on private equity. So I really want to share the journey I've been
Yes.
on. And bring people into this world because it is where most of the value is being
Yep.
created these days, and companies are staying private longer and many of them don't even get to an
Yes.
IPO now. People used to traditionally think the exit would be an IPO. Increasingly now, it's a trade sale either to a bigger competitor or to a big private equity fund. And you're seeing a
Yes.
lot of these what they call take privates. I think Hargreaves Lansdown would be a good recent example. Multi-billions being paid to take a company off of the public market into private ownership by a big private equity firm. So, some of the companies that we're investing in, we're looking at who's going to buy them, and it could be a Goldman Sachs or a KKR or something like that. These big
Mm.
players have got deep pockets. They've got
Yes.
$2.6 trillion of dry powder looking for investments at the moment. So that's probably where the exit would be, rather than the traditional route of an IPO onto the public markets.
Yeah, incredible. So, Graham, it all sounds very exciting stuff. Um, we've talked about your growing up. We've talked about what you do today. What are your ambitions? What are your goals over the next 5 years? Not just business wise, but also privately, personally. What are your goals?
Well, it's interesting. I've been through a real transitional year. I've been on a personal mentoring program, which has helped me to realize that you can kind of divide your life into two halves. So they're not equal in terms of years, but I've had a kind of the first half of my life where we've been typically you focus on success, on building wealth, and all that sort of thing. The
Yeah.
second half, you can focus more on giving back and on legacy
Yes.
and those kind of things. So for me, there's two sides to that. From a investment point of view, that's what's driving the launch of the 8-figure journey, is the sort of giving back and
Yeah.
financial education piece. And
Yeah.
then in our personal life, we're very active in our church. We're part of an international church here in Portugal. And we really want to support them in terms of things like planting out new churches, not just across the Algarve, but across the whole country. So we're trying to kind of build a legacy and a foundation that will support the church planting side of things, whilst also trying to help as many people as possible on that journey to a larger net worth that will give them the freedom of choice that they need for
Yes.
their long-term future. So it's kind of the two are self-supporting because one will fund the other. But
Yeah.
it's all about understanding your mission, understanding what gifts you've got. For me, it's probably mainly things like communication, as you've talked about, the videos, the books, etc. And then what's your calling? What are you wanting to actually achieve? And for me, it's financial education, using the communication and using the platforms I've got across the various media we've discussed. So pulling all of that together, this has been my kind of half-time year, a year of reflection.
Yes.
And then we're going into the second half, whether that turns out to be 5, 10, or 20 years, who knows? That's not in my hands. But I kind of have a renewed vigor to go into that with a whole bunch of new objectives to achieve. And I would encourage anyone that's at a certain point in life to have that period of reflection and say, well, okay, the first half looked like that. What do I want the second half to look like,
Yeah.
and where can I take it?
Yeah. I think what you're doing is what a lot of entrepreneurs do. There's an image of successful business people portrayed by, say, the media and entertainment world that they made the money because they were crooked. But in fact, most successful business people I've ever met or heard about actually are quite the opposite. They're actually very giving and, like you, want to help others, and philanthropy, I suppose you're talking about, and giving away wealth. Because as you get older, you realize you can't take it with you. You might as well do some good with it. Otherwise, it's a bit of an empty existence, isn't it? If you look at Buffett now, he's given away about a third of his wealth. He's given away about $50 billion in the last few years. He's still worth $100 billion. I mean, he's 94. What's he going to do with the money? So,
Well,
but give it to good causes.
yeah, no, absolutely. But what's fascinating is that when you combine the ability to give because you've created some wealth with the entrepreneur mindset, you can actually get a hell of a lot done.
Agreed,
And sometimes you think, oh, these big charities have got all these overheads and they're all driving their fancy cars. But if you find the right causes that you want to support
yes,
and you bring an entrepreneurial or an investor mindset to it, you can really make stuff happen, and that's so rewarding. And I must admit, the old saying, it's better to give than receive. I'm finding that to be true.
yes. There's a joy in it.
Yeah, and you can make a difference. And what could be
Absolutely.
more fulfilling and rewarding than that versus just piling up a load of cash that you're going to leave to your
Yeah.
children?
Do you think you might form some kind, unless you've already done it, some kind of financial education foundation or charity one day?
I certainly wouldn't rule it out. I mean, I think either forming it or backing one that's already there, that's got a decent
Yeah.
platform, because it does pain me, it grieves me that you look at organizations like the FCA in the UK, that every year they'll come up with new regulations and rules around investing, but never do you hear anything about financial education to
No,
enable people to make
not at all.
better choices.
Yeah.
So there's nothing in the system to enable financial education at school, in the
Agreed. Yeah.
workplace, at university. So it's all down to us as individuals. And what staggers me is the level of financial illiteracy at every level
Yes.
of
That's
society.
the problem.
I meet doctors and lawyers making 300,000 a year who are clueless about money. You just have to look at the current cabinet to know they're clueless. They're financially and economically illiterate. They have no idea what they're doing and how it's going to limit the growth of the country. So, yeah, I mean, so it's a real hobby horse of mine that we need to find a
Yeah.
way of getting this financial
Well,
education out to people. And people like you and I will do what we can through our platforms, but it needs to be much more widely dispersed than it is at the moment, if people are going to live the right kind of life and have the resources to get them through the challenging times ahead.
People don't realize that people concentrate on health, for example, and happiness, which are very important, of course. But one of the most important things in life is financial education, because people can literally end up homeless just by making poor financial decisions. If, for example, just how they spend their benefits if they're unemployed. Instead of prioritizing rent first, they prioritize cigarettes and booze. I know that's a generalization, but that's what I see when I see homeless people around. And I'm not being unsympathetic towards them, but because I help a local charity to help people help themselves, even poor people, to make the right financial decisions. Because there is this saying, isn't there, that money's the root of all evil, which of course is a missaying. The actual saying is the love of money is the root of all evil. But I actually think it's the lack of money that's the root of all evil. Really. And once you've got money, it's not because you want money just for the sake of it, but you've got more freedoms then, and more choices you can make. And I've visited Switzerland, which is one of the richest countries in the world, and the places I went to, there was virtually no crime in those places, because the police only needed to work part-time. There was just no incidents of crime. And I just thought, that's an interesting coincidence. Really?
Yeah, it's a huge topic, because I think there's all kinds of challenges in society now that are making certain countries a lot less attractive places to live. But if you come back to wealth, to me, the most important discipline is the discipline of living within your means and saving.
Yes,
if you
absolutely.
can't start that, you'll never get wealthy. So it doesn't matter whether you're earning 1,000 a year or 100,000 a year. If you can't save something, even pennies, it's a discipline, it's a habit. Once you start that habit and it starts to accumulate, then you start investing, you're on your way to wealth. But, if you were trying to teach your children the most basic tenets of financial education, the starting point is live within your means and save something. And then that's the basis on which all wealth ultimately is created, unless you marry well or divorce well.
That's a very good lesson to end the interview on. Sadly, we've come to a natural conclusion, but I found it very fascinating, Graham. You got a lot of fantastic insights. I'm looking forward to meeting you again. And all I can say is thank you for your time today, and all the best for the future in sunny Portugal.
Thank you very much, Tony. Great to have the chance to catch up with you again. And look forward to seeing you again at either your events or one of mine.
Sure. Bye for now.
Bye now.
Have a great day.
Thank you for joining us today. Please help us spread the word by sharing this podcast with your family and friends. And don't forget to subscribe.